Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this virtual press conference to launch B'nai Brith Canada's annual audit of anti-Semitic incidents in Canada. My name is Brian Herman, Director of Government Relations for B'nai Brith Canada, and I'm based in Ottawa. We are experimenting this year, as are so many, by holding our press conference virtually. We won't have simultaneous interpretation, but we'll take questions later in the official language of choice. In our audit, we examined the state of anti-Semitism in Canada for the year 2019. We'll present the facts and figures and review the trends. With us this morning, reflecting B'nai Brith Canada's national character, are three of our leading officers. Michael Mostyn is Chief Executive Officer of B'nai Brith Canada, and he joins us from Toronto, our national headquarters. Michael is a lawyer by training, and he has been B'nai Brith's CEO since 2014. In fact, he held the position I now have from 2006 to 2010. Ran Ukashi is National Director of B'nai Brith Canada's League for Human Rights, based in Winnipeg. Ran holds a PhD in Peace and Conflict Studies from the University of Manitoba and has led the League for Human Rights since 2018. David Matus, also in Winnipeg, is a renowned human rights lawyer and our honorary senior legal counsel. David serves also as B'nai Brith Canada's representative on Canada's delegation to meetings of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, or IHRA. You'll be hearing more about IHRA and its working definition of anti-Semitism as we go through the audit. Michael Mostyn will be speaking first this morning to provide an overview of who we are as an organization, the audit's major themes, and the concerns which have emerged. Our experts will be speaking for 15 to 20 minutes, followed by a question and answer session and a brief wrap-up. Just a reminder that the media can submit questions during the presentation of the audit using the email address media@bnaibrith.ca. And we've started receiving some questions and we look for more during the course of the morning. By using this method, the mailbox, you will help us keep all of the questions together in one place. We'll get through as many questions as time allows during the presentation, but we are mindful of ending by 11 o'clock. Please direct your questions when sent to a particular speaker, if at all possible. So I'll now ask Michael Mostyn to introduce the latest audit of anti-Semitic incidents in Canada. Michael?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you again, Brian, and thank you all for attending the launch of B'nai Brith Canada's 2019 annual audit of anti-Semitic incidents. To begin, 2019 was the fourth consecutive record-breaking year for anti-Semitism in Canada. In fact, there was an average of more than 6 anti-Semitic incidents in Canada every day. Anti-Semitic incidents have risen in this country year after year in a worrying trend that is akin to increases we are seeing in the UK, France, Germany, the US, and elsewhere. That is, Canada is not immune to an observed global rise in anti-Semitism. 2019 was also the second year in a row where the total numbers of recorded incidents exceeded the 2,000 range. 2018 was the first time this had occurred since we began documenting the phenomenon of anti-Semitism in 1982. But the landscape of anti-Semitism and hatred have significantly changed in the nearly 40 years since that time. It is quite possible that we have reached a new baseline for anti-Semitism in Canada. With the advent of the internet, social media platforms, and a variety of forums that cater to anonymous users, we have seen a dramatic increase in online hatred over the years. It is on these forums that radicalization in Canada, across the religious and political spectrum, take place most often in this country. We have seen the devastating effects that radicalization can have, from the Christchurch mosque massacres to the Tree of Life synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh, to the Chabad of Poway attacks in Poway, California, the shooting attack in Halle, Germany, and the dozens and dozens of attacks, some of which have turned deadly, against Hasidic Jews in New York and New Jersey. The medium of the internet has been an undeniable potent source in promulgating anti-Semitism. In Canada, there continue to be many challenges. First, we see that a shocking fifth of millennials cannot name a single concentration camp or know how many Jews were murdered in the Holocaust. Yet, we see a significant rise in Holocaust denial, distortion, and the advocating for the genocide of Jews simultaneously increasing in Canada. In fact, nearly a quarter of harassment incidents recorded in our audit was in one or more of these categories. It is no coincidence that where such ignorance exists, it will be exploited by those who wish to promote anti-Semitic conspiracy theories for their own nefarious purposes. Second, we see anti-Semitism permeate the political sphere in Canada. We have seen high-level political staffers accusing Jewish organizations of being ethnic barons, implying outsized influence in political affairs, amongst other conspiratorial sentiments. We have seen elected officials and candidates for political office celebrating and admiring members of listed terrorist entities. And we have seen the emergence of white nationalist organizations seeking federal party status in Canada and public legitimacy, despite failing to achieve the required threshold. On Canadian university campuses, we have seen Jews being spat on and student unions turning their backs on Jewish students and refusing to advocate for the provision of kosher food on the grounds that the student groups requesting such support are pro-Israel. Indeed, we regularly see the masking of anti-Semitism under the guise of so-called criticism of policies of the State of Israel. At Queen's University, the words "the Goyim know" was prominently graffitied on the campus, alluding to a far-right conspiracy theory that Jews surreptitiously manipulate global political and financial affairs and have done so for generations. And at York University, we saw an angry mob of demonstrators attempt to shut down, albeit unsuccessfully, an event organized by a Jewish student group while chanting "Viva Viva Intifada," referencing the violent spates of terrorism by Palestinian terrorist organizations in both 1987 and 2000. Regularly do we hear from Jewish students that they are intimidated by their student peers and even professors and feel that little is done to remedy the situation on campuses across the country. Many of us are binging on streaming platforms such as Netflix and Amazon Prime during these times of COVID-19. One popular new series is called Hunters, a fictional pursuit of Nazi criminals hiding in America during the 1970s. At last year's audit, Brith called for the immediate deportation of former Nazi Helmut Oberlander after a successful legal intervention in the courts. It is extremely disappointing that we are forced to repeat that call today. Helmut Oberlander has been fighting his deportation for a quarter century, and the time for justice is running out. Why is Oberlander still in Canada? More can and will be said, and it remains clear that more, much more, must be done to combat anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred in Canada. The lessons of history are all too clear. To further illustrate the trends of anti-Semitism in Canada in 2019, I will now turn it over to our National Director of the League for Human Rights, Ryan Kashi. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Michael. Can everyone hear me? Yes? Excellent. Okay, so thank you everyone for being with us today. As I was introduced, my name is Ryan Yukashi, and I'm the National Director for the League for Human Rights of B'nai Brith Canada. The League is B'nai Brith Canada's advocacy division and operates our national anti-hate hotline, advocates on behalf of the grassroots Jewish community, and publishes Canada's authoritative document on anti-Semitism, the annual audit of anti-Semitic incidents. So getting right into the numbers, nationally, 2019 saw 2,207 anti-Semitic incidents recorded in our audit, demonstrating an 8% increase over the previous year, and the second year in a row where the number of incidents exceeded 2,000. Moreover, this is the fourth consecutive year in which anti-Semitic incidents have been on the rise in Canada, suggesting that there is a higher baseline rate of anti-Semitic incidents in the country. While reporting to the anti-hate hotline has increased over the past several years, so too have overall incidents that come to our attention by sources other than the hotline. According to the latest police reported statistics in Canada, Jews remain the country's most targeted religious minority, accounting for 19% of all hate crimes, despite constituting approximately 1% of the total population. Harassment, both online and in person, constituted the largest category of incidents, followed by incidents of vandalism and violence, respectively. Over 83% of all of the recorded incidents were in the form of harassment, both those meeting and falling short of the criminal threshold, increasing 11% over the previous year. Nearly 25% of all cases of harassment involved Holocaust denial, distortion, or the advocating of genocide against Jews. Of particular concern is the fact that while anti-Semitism remains a marginal phenomenon in Canada, acts of vandalism and violence are occurring in much more brazen fashion, often in broad daylight and in the presence of eyewitnesses. The severity of such incidents is consistent with patterns observed around the world with the global rise in anti-Semitism. Regionally speaking, Quebec saw a 12% increase in anti-Semitic incidents since 2018, and the greatest number of overall incidents for the second year in a row, again exceeding numbers in Ontario, the province with the largest Jewish population in Canada. Disturbingly, we have seen several physical assaults in Quebec, predominantly targeting visibly observant Jewish individuals. Ontario experienced a 63% increase in incidents, the largest relative increase over a one-year period, returning to levels seen in 2017. Again, in Ontario, we have seen violent physical assaults against Jews, the defacing of both public and private property with vile and threatening graffiti, and even candidates for office using anti-Semitic stereotypes and slurs. It is noteworthy to mention that all other regions of Canada, including British Columbia, Alberta, the Prairie Provinces, Territories, and the Atlantic provinces, experienced decreases in anti-Semitic incidents. While these regions have had relatively lower rates of incidents historically, the decreases experienced were still generally higher than the recorded incidents in the previous 5 years, again indicating that there is a higher baseline of anti-Semitic incidents across the country. It is this trend that is cause for concern. As more and more communication is conducted through online platforms, there are consequently more anonymized forms of anti-Semitic harassment taking place, as well as the exchange of dangerous conspiracy theories and hateful ideologies. For instance, 2019 saw an over 11% increase in anonymous online harassment, where such platforms were often used to intimidate and threaten individuals while allowing the perpetrators to avoid being identified. Thus, we see that anti-Semitic harassment, vandalism, and violence permeates all spheres of life. It is experienced in workplaces, educational institutions, online, and every other social domain in Canada. On campuses, Jewish students have been harassed, denied support by student unions, threatened, and physically attacked at various institutions. On Canada's streets, Jews have been violently assaulted, robbed of their religious articles, among other acts of violence. We have seen public spaces being used to whip up anti-Semitic frenzies, including at the annual Al-Quds Day rally in Toronto, or community centers used to promote listed terrorist entities, or even elected officials or candidates for office expressing support for individuals associated with such entities. More and more, we hear of such cases. And what is all the more frightening is that these are no longer happening in clandestine communities, but rather out in the open. In sum, we understand that anti-Semitic incidents are indeed growing in Canada. The Canadian government has been very supportive in terms of listening to the Jewish community's security needs and working with Jewish communal organizations, including B'nai Brith Canada, to combat anti-Semitism. However, more needs to be done at all levels of government to produce the best possible results. Only through a concerted effort that ensures consequences for the purveyors of criminal anti-Semitism, as well as collaborative strategies to address the root causes of anti-Semitism in general, can progress be made in combating the phenomenon in Canada, both in the short and long term. As such, B'nai Brith Canada calls upon all levels of government to adopt our 8-point plan to tackle anti-Semitism. To speak to this plan, among other matters, I'll now turn my attention over to the Senior Honorary Legal Counsel for B'nai Brith Canada, David Matus, for his remarks. Thank you.
Bon, merci. Je commence avec le Québec. Le Québec a connu une augmentation de plus de 12% des incidents par rapport à l'année précédente, passant de 709 à 776 en 2019. Cela représente une augmentation de près de 70% des incidents depuis 2017. Le Québec a dépassé l'Ontario en nombre total d'incidents pour la deuxième fois consécutive, 2018 étant la première fois que cela se produit. Il y a eu 760 incidents de harcèlement sur l'Internet et en personne, 31 incidents de vandalisme et 5 incidents de violence. Je continue avec le plan en 8 points pour lutter contre l'antisémitisme du Brith Canada. Premièrement, chaque grande ville doit avoir une unité dédiée aux crimes de haine afin de garantir une capacité suffisante pour faire face aux crimes de haine à mesure qu'ils surviennent. Deuxièmement, tout doit posséder toutes les unités chargées des crimes de haine et les officiers existants doivent posséder une formation normalisée pour savoir comment identifier les crimes de haine et collaborer avec les organisations de la société civile représentative appropriée des communautés affectées en tant que liaison consultative communautaire avec les forces d'ordre. Troisièmement, nous demandons la publication de lignes directrices du procureur général pour les articles 318 et 319 du Code pénal que le processus décisionnel entourant les poursuites pour propagande haineuse n'est pas public et donc passible d'accusation de parti pris politique. La révélation de ces lignes directrices permettra au public et aux forces de l'ordre de clarifier ce qui est et ce qui n'est pas légal. Quatrièmement, il doit y avoir une approche de tolérance zéro pour la fourniture de fonds publics aux organisations nationales et internationales qui ont promu l'antisémitisme, y compris l'élaboration d'un mécanisme de sanction pour toute violation d'une telle politique. Cinquièmement, nous appelons toutes les provinces et tous les territoires à adopter une législation anti-SLAPP, c'est-à-dire une loi s'opposant aux poursuites stratégiques contre la mobilisation du public, afin d'empêcher les poursuites en diffamation frivole visant à dissuader les critiques ou les enquêtes de groupes se livrant à des questions d'intérêt public. Sixièmement, les universités doivent être tenues responsables de l'antisémitisme sur les campus canadiens. Les ministères provinciaux de l'éducation, les administrations universitaires doivent veiller à ce que leur propre politique antidiscrimination et mesures disciplinaires soient utilisées et appliquées partout où cela est nécessaire pour lutter contre l'antisémitisme sur le campus. Septièmement, tous les niveaux de gouvernement, les forces de l'ordre, la société civile et les établissements d'enseignement primaire et post-secondaire du Canada doivent adopter un plan d'action national contre l'antisémitisme, comme l'ont fait d'autres pays comme la France et la Norvège, impliquant pour mettre en œuvre les mesures anti-bias, normaliser la prévention de crimes de haine et le programme d'éducation sur l'Holocauste. Cela comprendrait l'adoption nationale officielle de la définition de travail de l'antisémitisme de l'Alliance internationale pour la mémoire de l'Holocauste, qui informe déjà la stratégie anti-racisme, la définition qui a été adoptée par plusieurs municipalités canadiennes ainsi que les gouvernements du monde entier. En adoptant la définition de l'antisémitisme le plus experte et le plus consensuel au monde dans toutes les juridictions gouvernementales du Canada, il est possible d'obtenir la clarté nécessaire sur ce qui constitue l'antisémitisme et de le combattre plus efficacement. Enfin et surtout, Canada a besoin d'un plan d'action pour lutter contre la haine sur l'Internet. En l'absence de l'article 13 antérieur du Code canadien des droits de la personne, une stratégie est nécessaire pour combler les cas dans les lois haineuses du Canada qui, selon Brith, peuvent être élaborées par le gouvernement fédéral en collaboration avec la plateforme et les médias sociaux et d'autres intervenants pour établir un plan stratégique fiable pour lutter contre la haine sur l'Internet. Nous avons vu les effets dévastateurs de la radicalisation d'Internet à travers le spectre politique et nous devons lutter contre ce phénomène en lui accordant l'attention qu'il mérite. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, David, Ran, and Michael. So we have some questions. A few arrived before we started this morning, but you could perhaps see I was busy with a few others that arrived while the presentations were being made. There's actually three that cover much the same ground, and I'll ask this first question to Ran. It's a bit beyond the year 2019, but has there been a discernible uptick in anti-Semitic incidents in Canada related to COVID-19? And if so, can you provide some examples?
Okay, thank you for the question. It's too early to speak regarding the specific numbers of how many cases we're seeing for 2020. We are aware that there are indeed anti-Semitic incidents related to COVID-19 happening in Canada, and we are tracking and documenting those incidents. But indeed, there are several COVID-related trends that we're seeing. We are seeing the phenomenon of Zoom bombing. So now, of course, more people are at home. They're using platforms exactly like this one, Zoom, to connect with friends and family. And a lot of Jewish organizations and Jewish religious institutions are experiencing Zoom bombings with anti-Semitic messages, often very graphic, pornographic images, and it's quite disturbing. In fact, just last week, a local synagogue in Toronto was experiencing that as well. So that's one concern. We've also seen some discrimination. People who are visibly Jewish or observant in Quebec have been targets of discrimination, businesses, on the street, having epithets hurled at them, threatened with violence. So we are indeed, unfortunately, seeing this happening in Canada as in other communities around the world.
Thanks, Ran. Another question, and again, there's more than one in the same vein, so I'll group them together. The Cantor Center, and that's a major institute, policy institute associated with Tel Aviv University, released its annual report on global anti-Semitism last week, and it contained a heavy focus on violent incidents grounded in the far right. Do we have the same concerns in Canada? Another question is, who is behind most of our incidents? The far right, neo-Nazis, those critical of Israel, and is Islamic extremism a factor? Michael?
Thanks, Brian. I'd first like to note that the Cantor Center out of Tel Aviv University, which just put out their report, as you just mentioned, uses its data in terms of its Canadian analysis from B'nai Brith. So we share that with the Cantor Center on an annual basis. And we're very proud to be their Canadian partners in terms of data analysis and collection of anti-Semitic incidents in Canada on an annual basis. To the second part of your question in terms of the different forms of anti-Semitism, where it's coming from, yes, we clearly share the concern of the radical right, neo-Nazis, the violence that is emanating and has been seen to emanate tragically in various instances around the world. We share those concerns here in Canada, but we don't turn a blind eye to anti-Semitism no matter where it emanates from. It manifests itself very differently in terms of from the far left, from radical Islamist sources, from the far right. But unfortunately, they are all unified in the hatred of Jews, and they all must be combated equally, if differently.
Okay, now question number 3, and again, I think this is meant for Ran Ukashi. and I'll put one or two together here from different parts of the country. You've mentioned how regions outside of Quebec and Ontario have experienced decreases in incidents. Can you explain what accounts for this decrease? And there is a particular question about why we think there has been such a steep drop in British Columbia.
Okay, thank you for that. So a few points to that question. Historically speaking, those parts of Canada outside of Ontario and Quebec have traditionally had lower levels of anti-Semitism. It's largely due to the fact that the Jewish community there is smaller, so there's less opportunity for direct forms of harassment, vandalism, or violence against institutions or property. So that's one consideration. But the real takeaway here is, while there has been a significant decrease, to be sure, it's actually still generally higher than the baseline that was experienced even half a decade ago. So we're seeing that while incidents are decreasing in those traditionally less impacted by anti-Semitism regions in Canada, they're not decreasing at a rate that is satisfactory. To be frank, they're staying around the levels of 2015 and 2016 when the numbers started going up. So we would like to see it go down further, of course. As for the steep drop in British Columbia, it could very well be that this exact regional phenomenon accounts for that as well. So we also have to look at these stats from not just a one year to 1 year, although we produce an annual audit. But if you look at trends over the periods of 5 years and 10 years, you see that there's an upward trend across the country, and that's really what is a cause for concern here in Brith.
So there's another question here for you, Ron, and it's looking at the same issue from a slightly different perspective. It says there's been a significant uptick in incidents in Ontario and Quebec. Why is that? How do you know that incidents are really increasing year over year, as opposed to this just being a case of better reporting? And a follow-up is, what are the most worrying trends?
Okay. So you might have to remind me about the three-part question there, but I'll try and answer it. And if I forget anything, remind me. So Ontario and Quebec have always historically had the highest rates of incidents. So it's not really surprising to see that where you have the two largest Jewish populations in Canada, you'd have the highest number of incidents. So that isn't what's particularly surprising. However, the increase in Ontario has been surprising in the 1 year period between 2018 and 2019. And in Quebec as well, the fact that it's overtaken in terms of overall incidents, Ontario, which has a larger Jewish population, is of course concerning as well. Now, last year was an election year, and historically one trend we've noticed with Brith over the years is that elections tend to bring out a lot of online anti-Semitism, a lot of vandalism, and in-person harassment as well. There tends to be an atmosphere that's engendered in periods of elections or any sort of political crisis, including or even a social crisis like the COVID-19 pandemic, that brings a lot of anti-Semitic sentiment to the fore. And I think that can account for a significant portion of this. So that's one element of this. What was the second part of the question, if you can remind me, Brian?
We talked about are incidents really increasing year over year, or is it better reporting? And then what are the most worrying trends?
So indeed, we do have better reporting. More and more people are calling the hotline or reaching out to us online. And people also want to see consequences for anti-Semitism. So we've had that expressed from the public. However, we also receive data from police agencies. We receive information from other organizations informally. We also receive information from mainstream sources that come to our attention. So we have noticed that the volume of anti-Semitic incidents that are out there are indeed increasing, even by numbers outside of our own. So that is what's indicative of a worrying trend. And what is most worrying is particularly the proliferation of online anti-Semitism. We're seeing hateful ideologies spreading like never before. The fact that nearly 1 in 4 of online expressions of harassment, if you also take into consideration some of the in-person examples of harassment, constitute not only Holocaust denial, but advocating genocide. These are often directed at individuals. So people are experiencing this. This was something you weren't seeing to such a degree even 5 years ago. So that's quite concerning. Not to mention the brazen nature of a lot of the violent assaults, which happened in broad daylight with eyewitnesses. So it shows that people are becoming more and more motivated and more radicalized online and in person, and it's having real world effects in the Jewish community.
Okay, the next question, there's actually a few here, and they deal with the global issues. So perhaps I'll turn to David Matus, because he is a member of Canada's delegation to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. And David also participates in annual visits by delegations from B'nai Brith International when they visit the UN specialized agencies in Paris and in Geneva. So David, for you, what are the trends internationally and how does Canada stand? And a related question is, we saw that last October, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion issued a major report on anti-Semitism. And has that had any impact?
What we can see internationally is a global increase in anti-Semitism, and what we're reporting in Canada is in line with global trends. In that respect, we're more or less in line with what's happening globally. The UN rapporteur put out a good report last October, Ahmed Shahid, and it was his first on the subject. So we don't have a year-by-year comparison, but it was significant. It came from a specialized mechanism of the UN Human Rights Council, because the Human Rights Council on the whole has been problematic in its over-the-top criticism of and proliferating criticism of Israel. The rapporteur, it's also notable, it came out with a statement just 10 days ago, noting the alarming rise in anti-Semitism since the outbreak of the COVID-19 crisis, and condemned religious leaders and politicians for what, some of them at least, for what they've been saying during the COVID crisis that's been helping to cause this increase. And what's happening is that Jews now, and it shows the kind of shifting nature of anti-Semitism that latches onto almost anything, and where Jews and Israel are being held responsible, so he notes, for developing and spreading COVID-19. And it's noteworthy, not just the shifting nature of this anti-Semitism, but the fact that the rapporteur notes that this over-exaggerated criticism of Israel related to this virus is part of the cause of this anti-Semitism.
Thank you, David. The next one is for Michael. You've mentioned B'nai Brith, Canada's 8-point plan. Has any progress been made in its implementation? And among your points, what do you believe should be done to combat anti-Semitism most effectively in Canada? Michael?
Sure. So B'nai Brith first launched the 8-point plan with our audit in 2017. We've been working hard at communicating that information for progress at every level of government, from the municipal, provincial, and federal levels. We've also been reaching out to associations such as the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, talking about the need for dedicated hate crime units in Canada and specialized training for police officers, not just in terms of identifying and being more successful and getting a further number of prosecutions in the criminal space on anti-Semitism, but in hate crimes in general. We've also been pushing to get the publishing of the AG guidelines on section 318, 319 of the Criminal Code, which are the hate speech provisions. We feel that's very important. And there's also, I should say that there's been a progress in Canada on the issue of online hate. There was a parliamentary committee last year that was looking into online hate, and we look forward to continue participating on that. We feel it's very important and lines up with the increase of online hate in our audit. But one element of our 8-point plan that I think is essential at this point in time to consider is following the lead of the European Union. The United States had recently appointed a anti-Semitism czar in Elon Carr. That is a model that Canada should be following. That lead, we need to have a national action plan on anti-Semitism generally, and there's no better way to do so than with the leadership of an anti-Semitism czar or leadership position.
Thank you, Michael. So keeping an eye on the clock, there's one question more that we have. And I should mention that if we haven't gotten to everybody's questions by the end of this press conference today, we will endeavor to provide responses to them later on. I'd like to direct this one to Ran, and it's in two parts. They're not quite the same, but you've mentioned how nearly 1 in 4 incidents of online harassment revolved around Holocaust denial, distortion, or the advocating of genocide against the Jews. Why do you believe that is the case? And the second part, which maybe we can address after, it comes from a journalist who was very interested in your opening answer to the first question about COVID-19 and anti-Semitism. The journalist says, also recalling David Matus's mention of Ahmed Shahid's statement the other day condemning COVID-19 related anti-Semitism, are Jews being blamed for the COVID-19 pandemic? So 2 questions there, Ron. If you could deal with Holocaust denial and distortion, and also, again, the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll begin with the second question first because it's simpler. Unfortunately, in many circles in which anti-Semites are expressing conspiracy theories, indeed Jews are being blamed for the coronavirus in several ways. There are some allegations, of course, utterly false, that the state of Israel developed the virus and is deliberately spreading it around the world to boost their pharmaceutical industry. We've heard these kind of comments. We've heard other comments that particularly observant Jewish community is deliberately spreading the virus and trying to infect people. All kinds of absurd allegations such as these. We've indeed heard them. People of good conscience, of course, can ignore these kind of conspiracy theories, but that's the nature of the type of anti-Semitic sentiment that we are hearing regarding the alleged culpability of Jews spreading COVID-19. And this is as much in Canada as it is elsewhere. So that's what we've been hearing. So I hope that answers that question clearly. Regarding the first question that was asked, so as was mentioned in both Michael's remarks and in my remarks, it's clear that Holocaust denial is increasing in a context in which more and more people, particularly millennials, know less and less about the Holocaust. They're less likely to meet a Holocaust survivor, as many of them are unfortunately passing away. They are receiving what we consider to be woefully inadequate education across Canada regarding the Holocaust, which is uneven as it falls under provincial mandates. So different provinces vary in the quality of the education regarding the Holocaust. So we see that in this context, people are not getting the sufficient information that they need. And therefore, many people are becoming susceptible to Holocaust denial and distortion on online forums, questionable website, or questionable resources that they may come across online and in real life. So I think that there's no coincidence that with the decrease in the quality of Holocaust education, the lack of standardization, you're going to see an uptick in people who adopt these pernicious and dangerous ideas. And that's why you see the two phenomena growing in tandem. So I think to address this, we need to have standardized anti-bias, hate crime prevention, and Holocaust education across the country so that we can begin combating this, because it's only going to get worse if we leave the problem alone.
Thanks very much, Ron. I should mention in relation to Rand's last point that, of course, Germany, as of March, has the presidency of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, and they will be very much focusing during their presidency on the challenge of Holocaust denial and distortion. So I'd like to thank my colleagues today for introducing the annual audit of anti-Semitic incidents in Canada. And thanks to all those who have submitted questions. We hope that the media and others viewing this webcast have found the information helpful to understanding the state of anti-Semitism in Canada. As I mentioned, if there are any follow-up questions, these can be directed to our communications team with details of how to do that in both our media advisory and our press release this morning. Before I turn to Michael Mostyn for some concluding remarks, I remind you that the audit is found on B'nai Brith Canada's website, www.bnaibrith.ca. You can have a look under the resources section, or you'll see indeed a banner headline at the top of our main page. And as we hope you will note, our press release carries the title, More Than 6 Acts of Anti-Semitism a Day. This press conference will be posted on our YouTube channel. You can also see the breadth of our activities on our website. And you can follow us on Twitter at B'nai Brith Canada, on Facebook, and on Instagram. So Michael, over to you for a wrap-up.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone who was attending and watching this, whether you're a reporter or a member of the general public that's interested in the anti-Semitism trends in Canada. These are very dangerous times and challenging times. We all know that we're going to get through this together. If anyone is experiencing anti-Semitism in Canada, we do encourage them to call our free anti-hate hotline. The number for that is 1-800-892-BNAI, B-N-A-I. Of course, you can also report nowadays on our website. The address again for that is bnaibrith.ca/report. You can also reach out to us over Facebook and Twitter, as people sometimes do over social media. But we are there to help, not just to compile the data, but also to assist each and every victim of anti-Semitism in this country. So thank you to everyone for tuning in today. And as Brian mentioned, if members of the media have any further questions, we would be happy to answer them after this webcast. So thank you again.